7:50 p.m. Katie, do you know if either Bob or Tony plan on being here for this meeting or no?
I did talk to Bob. He had an appointment and he asked me about the achievement meeting. He didn't ask me about this one, but I told him I had the other one covered.
We will proceed without them. So the first order is the approval of the agenda, which is a compliance with the Governor's Executive Order 21-40 dated April 28th, 2021. Discussion and or vote as to whether there is public access to the meeting through adequate and alternative means. Mr. Chandler, can you confirm that, please?
Yes, there is.
Okay, so we will just, I would ask for a motion to approve public access.
I'll motion to approve the agenda with that compliance.
Thank you. Second by Mrs. Feather. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Next up is the approval of minutes from March 9, 2021. If there are no questions, I would ask for a motion.
Motion to approve.
KF.
Second.
And followed by Ms. Smith. Makes my note-taking very tricky sometimes. All in favor? Aye. Passes 3-0. Next up is the discussion and or vote to approve the amended policy, G6, personnel benefit policy for non-unit administrative and support personnel. I will leave this to Mrs. Duncanson.
So can you guys hear me? Okay. This probably should have been updated last year, but it actually worked out well because when we adopted the G10 policy, we needed to also adopt some changes to this policy to make them kind of work better together. So I'll walk you through the changes that are being recommended. Mr. Adams has looked at this policy and has contributed to the policy. So I thank him for that, and we can talk through. So what the Educator Accountability Act did was, as we know from the passing of the G10 policies, it allows the superintendent more authority in the hiring. And what this policy does is that it then allows the superintendent to enter into contracts within a set of approved standards from the school committee. So in order to kind of work more seamlessly as it can work under the law. That
Katie, I'm sorry, your sound keeps going in and out. That's the exact opposite of helping.
Can you hear me? No, I can't hear you. So.
Yes, that's
okay. Hold on.
I keep forgetting I'm muted.
All right. So now you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Perfect. So I'll walk you through the changes that will make it work. The law itself is pretty clunky, so we tried to make it work seamlessly under the clunky law. But I think that this is actually probably, in my opinion, will be looked at by other districts as the way to do it, because I think this is what was really contemplated by the law, but it didn't do it correctly.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I just want to interject because this also makes us compliant with our own G10 policy.
Correct. Yeah. So under the G10 and under the educator accountability, the superintendent really is a decision maker on who works for the school department in each capacity, including assistant superintendent. And I think that position was left out of the G6 policy in the past to kind of elevate it, when in reality that individual, whoever's sitting in it, has had all the benefits of being a G6 person without being a name. So I talked to Tony about it, and he thought he was included in the policy, to be honest with you. So I said, I don't want you to be surprised when you see that this is being added. And he He thought he was already there. So I'm adding the assistant superintendent to the position. I'm also adding the position of facilities manager that was added last year when we went away from the Sodexo agreement. We haven't had a preschool administrator for at least a few years that I know of. So I cut that position out of the policy. Additionally, on page 2, the contracting authority, which language was added to that does give the superintendent the power to enter into contracts with all of these employees. So the positions themselves are delineated. The ranges, as you'll see, the benefits and all that are delineated. So it's a very limited authority to enter into contracts, but it is an authority for the superintendent to enter into contracts with the constraints that the school committee has approved. And it allows them to enter into employment contracts within the salary ranges and benefits and a 1, 2, or 3 year contract. The language is pretty legally, it's a legal sounding clause for lack of a better words, because of just the need to include a lot of that.
You can say it because Steve kibitzed on it. So it sounds, you can say it, fine.
Steve wrote it.
Would anyone like us to share the screen so that the policy is up?
It was in, I can pull it up if you want.
I'm just wondering if anybody would, that's not visually here, but
it, so it
Excellent
is,
language, Steve. I really enjoyed reading it and thought, oh, did Steve write this?
Yeah. Well, it also does include that, Katie, not that I'm stealing your thunder,
No.
that if they're going to go, if he wants to go outside of it,
yeah,
anything is unenforceable unless you guys approve it. He or she, I should say, the superintendent in that role. So I thought that was an important thing to say out loud, so it wasn't left to chance.
agreed. So that's the point of that clause, and it really does bring it in compliance with G10 and the law. And then beyond that are a few changes, and they're all underlined in the system, so I'm trying not to miss them. So in the life insurance portion of it, all the benefits like vacation and all that stay the same. Life insurance, for clarity's perspective, they had the last 2 sections had for all employees hired after January 1st, 2015. I added in the first 2 sections for those employees hired before January 1st, 2015. No one was hired on January 1st, 2015, so we don't have to worry about that overlap because it's a holiday and there's no one that was hired that day. So for clarity purposes, it's important that be in there, just because a new employee might read the policy, think that they are in a certain section, and then not continue to read that they're not in that section. So I did add that language, and then added the assistant superintendent in there and the facilities manager in there in the area that they would be compliant in, which would be the $100,000 policy. Sorry, we got a new puppy and he barks a lot. All right, and then the cell phone stipend I did add because they do include these 2 people in those, and they already are receiving this benefit. The assistant superintendent and the facilities manager, they either receive a cell phone from the district or they receive the stipend for the value of that contract. And then finally, there was a small typo right before the salary range, a mileage stipend included in the contract. It says contact, so I just added contract. And then for the salary ranges, I updated those ranges to be in compliant with the current contract. So there's no raises included in these salaries. This is the 2.5% that was in the last year of the G6. I'm sorry, my dog. This was the 2.5% that was included in the last year of the last contract for these folks. And I added the facilities manager, and I did add the assistant superintendent, and his current salary is within that range, so I included that. And I deleted the preschool coordinator. Finally, the last change, I think, is that there are a few individuals in the district that have like additional stipends attached to their salaries, and for transparency purposes, I did put any additional compensation in the form of stipends or bonuses should be memorialized as an addendum to the employment agreement or incorporated in the terms of the agreement, so that those are clear and transparent for the school committee, taxpayer, etc. So I will mute so that you don't have to listen to my dog.
I was just going to say, Katie, you're more bothered than it by us. I think it's adorable. So.
He's lucky he's cute.
So if I could just ask a couple of quick questions.
Yes, I was having trouble with my space bar. Ms. Smith, please. Go ahead.
Thank you. Just at the ending, that additional compensation, and I apologize because I probably don't know the correct answer to this. Should that be advised to the school committee prior to the superintendent giving it? Or I'm not sure how that works, and whether or not we should have that in there, or he just has the free reign to do that and we just find out about it with the contract, or if there's an addendum to the contract.
I'm not sure what you mean.
Any additional compensation in the form of a stipend or bonus. So I'm just not sure. Does the superintendent have to first get such approval from the school committee on something like that that's outside of the scope?
Yeah, because we would still be approving the contracts. Isn't that correct?
That's what I didn't think that we did anymore. That's why I was asking.
No, but go ahead, Katie.
I can very easily add language in there that just says that the school committee shall be consulted, anything is included in the budget too as well. So that could be part of it.
I have to say the way if I may, the way I read it, Katie and Carrie, is that the salary and benefits that are delineated in the G6 policy are, and I just happen to know this one because it was highlighted because it was the assistant superintendent. I think it's $135,000 to $145,000. I don't know the other numbers, but if and then there are the healthcare benefits and the cell phone and we saw the laundry list of things that are in there, mileage or whatever. When I was looking at these edits and what Katie did with respect to this, I view those as being not yours anymore, if you will, unless you decided you wanted to change D6 down the road and you want, again, as a policymaking body, you can do it this way and then say, we didn't like the way that worked. This is nothing is forever unless it's working, right? But so for those things, I think it is something that the superintendent has empowered to do. But I viewed an amorphous stipend that is not delineated, for example, like doctorate, or there's a thing on advanced lanes, which is delineated expressly, I think it's $5,000. Am I making that up or am I in the ballpark?
No, that's in there.
Yeah. So that is very clear. If a person has an advanced lane, they get this in the contract, and you guys have spelled that out in G6. But some amorphous stipend, I think that would have to come to you. My personal view on this, it would have to come to you as members of the school committee, because even though it's delineated as a possibility, it isn't delineated with any specificity, because heck, somebody could get a stipend for $1 million.
Right.
Yeah, to that point, Steve, isn't the law, at least local law, clear that only the school committee can enter into a contract?
Well,
because I looked at the G6 as more of a thing of, if the superintendent is operating within the policy, we would not have any real standing to say no to a contract.
Right. So what you're doing in G6 is empowering him. You're saying you have our authority
Okay.
to enter into these contracts on our behalf. That's what you're giving him, as long he or she, that's what you're giving them, as long as they're within the parameters. That's why the parameters need to be neatly set. So Carrie, that's why your question, I think that would be the type of, and I said $1 million. That's really kind of silly that no one's going to do that. But like,
Yeah, but it's a good example.
a stipend that nobody knows about that gets paid in order to that's what you're trying to avoid. So from my perspective, that needs to come to you. Now, there may be a very good reason for stipend A and B, and it may be completely logical and in good faith and a cost savings to the district instead of hiring more personnel. But I view that as the type of thing that would be appropriate for the school committee to chime in on, or you could get really anal retentive in terms of what you're willing to do with stipends, right? You could go that route.
Why don't we just put an added sentence of, or a couple words of, and approved by the school committee to that sentence?
That's what I was asking. That's exactly why I was asking, Mark. So thank you for that. And thank you, Steve, for your explanation. I just wanted to make sure, because to me, the superintendent has these authorities and we've set the parameters for him, but that was, to me, open-ended. And I wasn't sure, do we get it after the addendum, or can we force it in this policy that it has to be brought to us?
Yeah, I think those contracts would, or at least the addendum to the contract would have to be approved by the school committee, correct? Katie, go ahead.
So I think if we refer to the contracting authority section, it says, should the superintendent seek to enter into an employment contract with a non-unit employee on terms that fall outside of the range for salary and or stipend range and or outside employment benefits, then the school committee must approve those portions of the contract. So if we refer it back to that section,
Okay.
we should be in compliance, right, Steve?
Steve, you're
Yeah, I'd have to sort of look at it. Probably, I don't have it in front of me, but I think that would be fine.
And then
But I think
looked
for
at,
clarity's purposes, what the goal, Carrie's goal, and I understand it, and I agree with it, of course,
Absolutely.
because you don't want to have anything rogue that you don't know about in sort of some dark room, right? And that's not really an issue here. So it's really thinking of stuff that really is not a big problem, but you want to avoid it. But yeah,
no, but we
so
want to have the
I
rules in
definitely-
place before it's a problem.
So it can't be one.
Right.
Right. Yeah, and just because that other paragraph does, it mentions stipend or whatever, but it says as outlined in this policy, and these are going to be outliers to what's in the policy. So that's where, if we refer it back to it, that's fine, but we have to understand that it's outliers. So I guess I'm just looking for the language just to tighten it up.
so I'm planning on just adding in and approved by the school committee in accordance with the
Subsection.
contracting authority as outlined
That
above.
That makes sense.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
That was a
No,
good
thank you,
question.
Carrie.
I saw that addition and that was great. That was great.
Okay, well, I ask a lot of questions, so you might not think that for very long, Steve, so I'll take it when I can.
No, let me tell you, I love the questions.
Yeah. Well, I have to thank Carrie. She really took over for me last Thursday evening during the call. She asked some good questions that I would have had. So it took me a long time to watch the video, but when I did, I was pretty proud of it.
How to represent for the Carries.
Yeah. The other question I had is related to the salary ranges, because I understand that it goes back to what we contracted for the 2.5%, and that absolutely makes sense. Now I'm going to add the however, because shouldn't the upper salary go up that 2.5%, but the lower salary stay within the range and where it was? So if we have to replace the position, are we saying that we have to automatically replace that? And I just asked that question because as you continue to go on, if people are retiring and we're putting new people in, where we put them.
What's happened in the past, Carrie, is if for some reason we replace somebody within that period,
Mm-hmm.
they are bound to that, because let's face it, we have structured these salaries to be what we project for our budgets.
Right.
So, and then what'll happen is once that if for some reason we needed to bring in like a special person to replace, the doohickey administrator, then what we could do at that point is change G6 on the fly for that particular purpose. I'd rather keep the short leash on the salaries
Okay.
going in, because then what'll happen is this policy shouldn't have to be changed for another 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, and that was my only concern, was looking at it. And again, I'm coming from the business side, and not from a public entity.
Yeah.
So, and I look at it and say, unless there was like a 5-year reassessment, I wouldn't be touching the low range number, but I would be increasing the high range number to fit what we're locked into. So
We used to change this policy like clockwork, I think every January. And quite honestly, I've had enough of that.
I can
So,
understand why.
Katie?
has something.
Well, we're kind of set up to continue with that model because if you're gonna give raises, if a superintendent is gonna recommend raises for any G6 employees, most of the, I want to say probably about a third of the employees in this range are in the top, just because it only takes a few years to get to the top ranges. It is good HR practice just to be responsive to market rates, and salary range bottoms shift just as frequently as salary range tops. So the bottom floor of a salary range should reflect. It's not like you're getting massive increases in any of these budgets for administrators. You're not getting 5%, 10% raises. You're getting 1-2%. So these are really minimal increases from a perspective of an employee, $20, $30 a paycheck. So that is good HR practice to move the whole range.
Great. I just wanted to make sure. And the only other thing I have then, Mark, and I apologize again, just really is the last question.
Don't apologize.
Should we be, like, the preschool coordinator in that role and hasn't been filled for several years? Is that because it has integrated into someone else's position?
Yeah, what's happened is Rachel actually changed the model of the position. Actually, Katie, why don't you answer? You probably more clearly can answer it clearly.
I wasn't here when the model did change, but there used to be a human being that held the position of preschool coordinator. I believe that person retired.
Yes.
And it was filled by a coordinator position that is part of the teachers union and is supervised by the special ed department and the building principal at Ashton. So that individual is covered by a bargaining agreement. I think it's working out pretty well. If we ever we're in a situation where we need a principal or somebody for the preschool, because I know down the line there is thought that the preschool will be housed at the transition center, then I think that should be a separate discussion of adding that position, because I don't think you could even, under certification laws, I think you would have to name it principal of Cumberland school preschool program because of certification.
Essentially, we were paying an additional administrator who wasn't had essentially no responsibility of the building itself, when we felt that the Ashton principal could do that job, that part of the job.
And that's why I just wanted to make sure it was incorporated, because I know that the push has been in Rhode Island to get preschool in all of the schools and every town. Of course, it'll be probably one of those unfunded mandates, but just trying to look at it and plan. And I'm just wondering, as long as it's already been incorporated, I feel comfortable taking it out and then reassessing in the future. But if it was just one of those, we haven't had to fill it yet, I just thought maybe we should keep it in, but I agree now. Thank you.
Yeah. So if there are any other questions? Anyone that wants to raise a hand or anything like that, I can see if your hand's raised. I would just say that we need to make a motion to approve the amendment before we approve the amended policy?
Motion to approve the amendment. Don't ask me to read it.
Not going to ask you.
Thank you.
Let's see, that's KF. Second by,
I will second the motion to approve the amendment in addition to the amendment just discussed.
no, which,
Which, I mean, are we looking at the amended policy? We're looking.
no,
to
we're
approve-
approving the amendment to the amended policy.
Okay, I second.
Okay. All in
Who's on
favor?
first, Mr. Fiorello?
Yes.
I.
I
Aye. And now a motion to approve the policy itself
Motion to approve.
by Ms. Smith, second by Mrs. Feather. All in favor?
I
Aye. Approves 3-0. Next up is discussion and a vote to approve new policy. A5, Title IX protections from sex-based discrimination. Other than retitling it, Mr. Adams worked on this on his lonesome. So, Mr. Adams, I'll let you take over.
As everybody probably knows at this point, during the Trump administration, there was a lot of discussion at the Department of Education about updating Title IX. Of course, now we're in the Biden administration, so now there's discussion about changing it again. And nothing has yet to happen in that respect, although it's kind of one of those things where you kind of have to pay attention almost on a daily basis. I think Katie sent me something a couple of weeks ago, and then one of my colleagues was in something was in a meeting, and something came from DOE about basically changes that may happen. But the gist of it is, and this is really true generally, is that we really do need to have a Title IX policy, and there is no per se Title IX policy. Title IX is the federal act that protects discrimination on the basis of sex, which is the way that the act is actually written. And there is definitely a lot of case law on what that means, and whether that means just protecting females or what it means. It can mean sexual orientation or gender identity and so forth. And there's all sorts of discussion about that in the court system. But when the DeVos Department of Education, one of the things that they wanted to do and did was make rulemaking that the process of a Title IX investigation needs to be more rigorous than it was. I think a lot of people who are lawyers and not political people or policy wonks or whatever, and I count myself among the lawyer contingent, thought that the process, the Title IX investigations, mostly at the higher ed level, I mean, sure, that it can happen K through 12, but the real issues occurred at the higher ed level. The process was not rigorous. There was no system of justice that was fair to all, and particularly the DeVos Department of Ed viewed some of the problems being that it was not fair to the accused. And I think there is some legitimacy to that concern. And again, I'm speaking as a lawyer, and I'm not making any judgments about a person who has made a claim of sexual assault or anything of that nature. But there was not uniformity in the process, and there was not any accountability for the school department, the schools that were running these systems. So that was something that was important when Betsy DeVos was the head of the USDOE, and they made some rulemaking that we need all schools that are accepting federal funds need to have a Title IX policy. They need to have a Title IX coordinator. They need to conduct investigations. They need to pick how they are going to do those investigations and set all of this forth so it's transparent to both the perpetrator and the victim, if you will. And that's, of course, seeing it through a lens of sexual assault. It also applies to things like, fair and equal treatment in athletics and various other things that are not as heavy and laced with meaning as would be a sexual assault, but certainly do have importance and meaning to the folks who are student athletes and so forth. So the Cumberland School Department does not have a policy. And so we have done our own trainings on the relatively new requirements of under Title IX to have policies and have a rigorous process and to delineate what that process requires of everyone involved so that everybody understands what the process is. And we put this together, and we put it together based on other policies that we're familiar with and based on our own internal Barton Gilman training that we have done as people being trained. We also do trainings, obviously, but we have been trained. We were trained because of these changes. We needed to get some training ourselves to make sure that we knew what the requirements were. So the gist of this is, I think this policy is actually in pretty good shape in general terms, but it provides for a Title IX coordinator, an investigator, what the investigation will be, how it will be conducted, and so forth. The appeal, I'm just looking through it myself, and I'm looking through what I gave to Mark. I assume it's in similar shape, Mark. I don't, to what I gave you.
I changed the title. That's it.
Okay, yeah.
So that a non-lawyer could understand what it said.
Yes, thank
and
you.
Just for your record, that language actually came from the Department of Ed. That sentence.
The change you made. Yeah. So the appeals process, confidentiality, discipline, it's all items that are addressed in Title IX. That's basically it. The goal is to make sure that we have a policy, which you have to have. We have a Title IX coordinator, which you have to have. And currently, I think this meets with what the goal of the Department of Ed has been. I don't know whether the Biden administration is going to make changes. I mean, who the heck knows, right? You don't know what's going to happen. From my personal perspective as a lawyer, I think having a process that's at least to a certain extent transparent, I mean, this could be edited and added to or changed, that everybody knows what the process is better than not having any policy to begin with. So that's essentially it. I desperately wanted to get something on paper so that we could have a policy. If we need to modify it, change it, edit it, this is compliant, but if we want to do additional things or change it, we can certainly do that, and may even be required to do it if the US DOE under this administration makes changes that are 180 degrees from what we currently have. And that could happen, but I think it's unlikely on some of the process things, but I'm just handicapping that as a lawyer. So that's it.
Questions? Anyone have questions? Ms. Smith.
Thank you, sir. Just Mark, and you just said exactly what my question was going to be, because the title is protections from sex-based discrimination. And throughout the entire policy, it's discussed as sexual harassment. So all I'd like to do there is, as we do with other policies as well, is if we can just perhaps put a few definitions around what we are stating that to be. Because when you look at sexual harassment, that is somewhat different from sex-based discrimination. And I know that we have the bullying and the other policies as well. So I just want to make sure that we interloop everything so that we understand what each specific one relates to.
I will say that we do have a sexual harassment policy where all those definitions are laid out. This is really just the this is just the straight compliant part, right, Steve? That's why I didn't want to really make any changes initially. You're muted.
No, sorry about that. But I think, Carrie, your point is well taken. Because the policy is more general. It is, I mean, the way the the way the law is stated is it doesn't say sex-based, it does say on the basis of sex. That's what the law says.
Right.
But the definitions don't include definite, because I don't think it's defined any better in the law necessarily.
No, they're having that discussion actually at the Supreme Court level.
Yeah, I mean, they're having, and they will continue to have that discussion for decades probably. But I think it is worth maybe me taking another pass at what the verbiage is that we use around sex-based discrimination or sexual harassment, because sexual harassment to me is a subset of sex-based discrimination. It doesn't need to be sexual harassment in order for it to be sex-based discrimination, obviously, right?
Right. And
I feel like that's what you're driving at, Carrie, if I'm mistaken.
Absolutely. No, that is absolutely. And I just like what you said at the beginning of that. And that is harassment on the basis of sex. And that really is what this is all about. So I like that personally. And again, Mark, to your point, we have a sexual harassment, we have a bullying, and this is just the third piece of those types. But at the same time, it's Title IX. We have to get that out there.
Right. And Title IX deals with more than just sexual harassment. And I think that's why the Department of Ed, somewhere where I read it, they actually use that language about sex-based discrimination to make it more of a generic overview, I think.
Yeah. So that's the only thing that I would think.
Although I'm not going to argue with the two lawyers in the room. Oh, I will.
Yeah, but I think the point is well taken about this being heavy on sexual harassment and light on, because really that's the one that I feel like my experience is in general terms, because I watched the NCAA tournament, and if everybody else did too, with the weight rooms, the alleged weight rooms for the women's team. So I probably should.
I don't think it was
slow
alleged.
down, but at least it was
Wow,
an issue that was. But it came up and it was addressed because it was ridiculous. It was patently absurd in every way, shape, and form. But I think we probably couldn't. I wouldn't mind trying to address that a little better in this policy to be responsive to what Carrie's saying, because I think it's right.
Okay.
I don't know. Is this on for a vote? I'm not usually at these meetings, so I'm probably making a mockery of it, Mark. I don't know.
No, not at all. This is the process. No, we can easily table this specifically so that we can address the concerns. You can do a little more research if you want, make change, whatever you want to do. For all intents.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind doing that. I think it's a good point, and I think
I do like definitions.
Yeah, I'm not even thinking definitions. I'm thinking about having a little more, maybe even make it more clear, because really the changes to the DeVos administration really largely related to the claims of sexual harassment and the poor handling by institutions of higher learning of those complaints. That's really why all of this is happening. But
okay.
The policy should be more inclusive.
Okay, Mrs. Feather.
Yeah, I was just going to say I agree with Carrie. I think that I think we're all in agreement that it could be that the little language could be more universal and more in line with what the policy is. So I wouldn't mind tabling it just to get that fixed. But then after that, I think that I'm good with this as it stands.
Mrs. Duncanson.
I think that just a mechanism for somebody to make a complaint or claim with the Title IX coordinator about a discrepancy of how they've been treated based on sex is all you need. So whether it's a sports team that has a complaint or whether it's an employee that has a complaint that they're being treated differently on the basis of sex, that's the only thing that it's not harassment, but it's for the girls' facilities for a sport is to carry on to the weight room is less than the boys, and that is I know in Warwick we had this issue with regard to the dugouts for softball versus baseball, and the boys' dugouts were quite a bit better than the girls. And it resulted to the complaint of the boys is that both teams had to be moved temporarily while the girls were being fixed to be equitable. But there was, the point is that we need to have a mechanism to address things like that.
Let me ask you this, Steve and Katie. Would we be able to remove the sexual harassment portions of the other policy and include it in this policy to kind of streamline the other policy to focus on other stuff? Or are we still better with the overlap?
I think you could definitely have this policy contemplate all of it. I don't see a problem in handling it that way because Title IX is meant to address, but you don't have to. You also can handle. You have to have a Title IX policy that is meant to address discrimination on the basis of sex, which can be sexual harassment, or it can be dugouts, or all the stuff that we know, the weight room. I mean, all of that stuff. And you can also have a sexual harassment policy that is separate from Title IX, because Title IX is simply, it's a federal law that has certain import and it's required. What you do in a sexual harassment policy, as long as it's not inconsistent with Title IX, you can do some additional or different things. If I'm making any sense, there's no need to have it streamlined into one, but that's sort of up to you guys, as long as what you're doing is not inconsistent with Title IX.
Yeah, and I think a harassment policy actually delves a little bit more into the procedures that are followed if there's a claim or a case or anything.
Yeah, and I like that in a Title IX policy, because that was the big issue, is that somebody makes a Title IX complaint and nobody knows how to deal with it. Can they call witnesses? Are witnesses sequestered? Do you get to confront the witnesses? Do you not get to confront the witnesses? Ad infinitum. And I think ultimately, if there's going to be a sexual harassment claim, you're going to have to investigate it under Title IX. There's no argument there. You're going to have to investigate under Title IX. So Title IX is going to be implicated if you're going down that road, so to speak. Again, there's a jurisdictional issue with this, and it has to happen on school grounds, essentially. That's Title IX.
So please look at our sexual harassment policy when you do it and make sure that it actually aligns. I know we keep looking at a lot of these policies are getting dealt with at the same time. And I just would hate to find out like a year from now that we had policies that were conflicting from one another.
Yep. So I'm just writing myself some notes.
Sure.
Mark, do we have a specific Title IX coordinator now?
No.
Right. So that's going to have to go back to
I can tell you who it's going to be, probably. Mrs. Duncanson.
Well, I think my personal view is it should be the assistant superintendent.
Okay.
That's what I was wondering. And then I also wonder if
or the
we
super.
have that, does that also fall into the scope of the salary ranges and everything else that we just set in the past policy that we just approved with the amendments? So it's just something that we may have to readdress then.
No, what'll happen is it'll just be an additional responsibility that he won't get anything for.
I view it, I as the lawyer for the school committee, I view that as an additional assignment that's part of the job of being, and should have been part of the job, frankly, but that's just me.
And actually, I think, although we don't have an official Title IX coordinator, I don't believe that's what we call it in the harassment policy. There is somebody named as the person to take care of that. And we specifically mentioned that if that person, I think it's actually the superintendent, Katie, isn't it? If there's a claim against somebody for harassment or something, and then
or designate,
or designate
superintendent, then it falls to the HR director, I believe.
Well, right. The super
right.
If I remember correctly, the wording is the superintendent's designee as well.
Yeah,
So
we love throwing in the designee.
Right. And that's a very good point on the Title IX and how we bridge the two in that respect too. So if this is going to be something under the sexual harassment policy in this one based on the discrimination on sex, then having that Title IX coordinator specific written in there somehow, I think it would be great. And then at the same time, it doesn't cause a student to think, I don't know where I'm supposed to go. I don't know exactly what this is. And now I have to talk to people. I'm already overwhelmed. I don't know what to do. And also for employees, because employees have to be an immediate. So it's just something to think
Oh,
about.
trust me, the employees know exactly where to go to. They go
Yeah.
usually straight to their union.
Well,
I mean,
True.
that's what's happened in the past, I believe.
Yeah.
right, but they are supposed to know, Carrie's right, that they're supposed to know who to go to and how
Yeah.
it's supposed to be done. There's supposed to be a coordinator and an investigator, and they're not generally supposed to be the same person for relatively obvious reasons. The coordinator manages it, but doesn't do the investigation. That's a whole part of the revisions by the DOE.
And I like that in here, the decision-making is with the superintendent, the appeal is with the school committee. I
Yeah, and
thought
that's
that-
basically our baseline policy for all appeal processes.
Yeah,
Everything just goes up the chain until it gets to the school committee.
yeah, I thought it was good to have it written in here. And Steve, when you do that, if you could just go to page 6, because you do state how the appeal is to the chair of the Cumberland School Committee, but the next paragraph down, you say just by the committee. So if we could just say by the school committee,
Yeah, it should be by
so
the school
that
committee.
nobody questions.
Good catch.
I was trained by a lawyer.
There you go. Oh, great.
So, I mean,
The last paragraph of that section.
yes, where it starts both parties. The
Yep.
third line says by the committee or something like that on ours, so. Yeah, appeals will be decided by the committee, and I just wanted to say school committee.
Yep.
Mrs. Duncanson, did you want to add something?
And then the only other thing, which is in our other sexual harassment policy, so maybe this is something that could just get looked at. We do talk about the minor's designee potentially also being legal counsel or other aspects. And I know that we spent a lot of time going over to get that word specific on what it really meant, like who is that person that could be there for the minor and things. So I just want to make sure that we're aligning the languages.
And Steve, when you look at the sexual harassment policy, you'll have to look at the bullying policy also, because there's overlap in that also.
Which we just approved all of the changes.
Yeah, let me tell you, that was one of those things I just knew. You look at some of these policies, you'll see that they get changed or amended like every other year, every single year. And that's why it's important not to actually name people, but positions for Title IX coordinators and all this kind of stuff. So if there are no other questions, I would ask for a motion to table.
Motion to table.
I'm sorry, was that Mrs. Feather?
Yep.
And I will
Second by Ms. Smith. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. That passes 3-0. Next up is consideration of policies to create or review for future agendas. I know that things that are being worked on right now, I know that Mrs. Rogalski has worked with her Health and Wellness Committee to look at the revisions that had been made to the Health and Wellness policy, and that'll come on a future agenda, hopefully pretty soon. There's also a new policy, the inclusion policy, which speaks directly to the inclusion of special education students that will be introduced relatively soon. And there are going to be some changes made to the transgender policy, mostly around new language, new regulations of that kind of stuff. Also, I know that I'd like to, Katie, what was the other policy that we had talked about?
So we have a number of staff members that are not members of G6
Oh, right.
or either union, so it would be a non-unit. basically an at-will employment policy.
Crossing guards, bus monitors, and
Substitute teachers, and yeah, so it would my understanding is that Mr. Prignano normally passes a funding regulation which outlines how much these employees are paid, but we need to really outline just specifically the entitlement to any benefits, which there are none
right.
for the most part.
And we've talked for a number of years about adding some kind of benefits, not to get into this too deeply, but for substitute teachers to try to attract and retain them. So whatever we do or don't do, we should have in this policy as well. So
yeah, and I'm working on that right now, and I should have something hopefully by June.
okay, sounds good. All right, ladies, do you have anything that you'd like to look at or review or create off the top of your heads?
No, I'm still reviewing the finance, all of those policies, and we'll get to those. I think that we have a lot going on, and then with the contract negotiations, I want to make sure that.
And it'll take a while because you
Yeah.
have to make it because there's a lot of talk in town, not just the charter, but the ordinances
Right.
that our policies are based on, and also state law.
Right. So there's a lot going on with that, but I mean, simple little language things. Well, they're not simple, but you know what I mean? Those are.
I know exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So those are, I mean, that's fine, but there are a lot of things that are occurring. And I would think that once we pass the June 30th date and General Assembly closes, we'll have a better understanding as well what's coming with the state, and we'll be able to maybe start to look at a little bit more.
Sure. Man, that was one of those projects that I don't expect anytime soon.
Well, you put my two favorite things together, so.
That's what I knew it was right up your alley.
I was gonna say, that sounds fun.
Yeah,
Policy, procedure, risk,
that's right.
finance.
All right. So if there's nothing else, I would ask if there's any comments from the public.
While we're waiting for that, I just want to mention that I have been working on a communications policy. So, or just research for a communications policy at least.
Yeah, and that could also take some time because there's not a lot out there.
It has been.
So, yeah, but I'm sure Cambridge has one because Cambridge has a policy, or Barrington or East Greenwich, they have a policy on everything.
I've got a chart so far and those three are on it.
Yeah.
And the training class didn't offer as much either.
No.
Right.
All right. So no public comment. So I will move to adjournment. Anyone?
Adjourn.
By Mrs. Feather,
Second.
second by Ms. Smith. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We stand adjourned at 7:42.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody. Take care.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you, everyone.